Yo, my peoples, what's up? Welcome back to Shelf Stories, the channel that tells tales from games, books, and life. And also, welcome to the One Stop Co op Shop podcast. I am your host, Jason. Thank you so much for stopping by. This one is impromptu. A internet conversation has blown up that was very, very interesting. I got into some back and forth with a lot of interesting characters on the interwebs, people whom I respect and who I disagree with on various levels. So I wanted to do a think piece on this topic. And rather than just kind of do a monologue, I wanted to get in somebody who knew their stuff. So we are going to do this as a dialogue. So this is a little bit different than an interview that I usually conduct. This person has agreed to come on to help me think through something. So they're going to lend their expertise. The topic is Deluxification in games. The big blingy games right now, we're talking about $350 for Tsuro. The tile laying game. Yes, a tile laying game can cost $250, but y'all didn't know that, or some people didn't. And it falls upon a bunch of different, deluxe games. Do we like them? Do we not like them? I want to go through all of them, the pros and the cons, and I want to talk about that. The person whom I invited to help me talk about this knows a lot from multiple angles. He is the designer of viticulture and scythe. He is the head of Stegmaier Games, which published Wingspan, which we're going to talk about somewhere in this conversation, and an all-around decent guy for answering my email and being able to schedule something pretty quickly. He is Jamey Stegmaier. Welcome back to the show.
Hey, Jason, thanks for inviting me to talk about this topic. It's something I think about quite a bit, and so I'm very interested to hear your perspective on it.
I knew you think about this quite a bit. So Wingspan, being the publisher of Wingspan and a lot of other titles, is a big reason why I wanted to have you on. Also, just in general, I know you think a lot around this topic because of your blog. You have kind of come at this maybe not deluxification, but the cost of stuff and the health of the hobby and from a numbers perspective on your blog. So before we get into it, tell people about your different content stuff, your blog and your videos and all that kind of thing.
Yeah, I write a blog that's mainly focused on crowdfunding, and it's branched into entrepreneurship and sometimes game specific stuff, but the general topic of crowdfunding. And I also have a game design YouTube channel that probably isn't relevant to what we're talking about today, but I think a lot about game design. I think a lot about publishing, and I think a lot about serving Stegmaier Games customers. And so I think that's a perspective I hope to add today to the conversation about how can we best serve the people who love the games that I love to play as well.
Yeah, and I'll be completely honest. So I got into some conversations and I made some assumptions, and I want to check if my assumptions bear out with the numbers. I don't just want to be a person that opines, right? How easy would that be? I have a YouTube channel. I do have a lot of opinionated perspectives, but I think there's some hard numbers to look at here. And I wanted to invite somebody on who not only is into the numbers, but is used to communicating about those numbers. So that's Jamey's ticked a lot of boxes there. So thank you very much. I appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, my pleasure. Now, I know you normally start these videos with kind of a disclaimer to say that we're not trying to cancel these things. Yes. And do you want to share your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. Yeah. Okay. So a frame for our conversations. So Jamey does watch a lot of my videos, and I think that's also where there's a relationship. And so this is in keeping with all my videos. And for whatever reason, I think conversations about this can tend to have an edge that they don't need, because I think people respond to criticism in certain ways. So publisher posts a game, $350 thing, or $750 all in, or whatever. And then a person will say, whoa, and then have a criticism. And then it's like, well, why are you criticizing them? And because it has that edge of okay, well, what are you trying to say? Are you trying to ban and cancel? You're trying to blame and shame people who, they'll leave people alone with their fun type of thing. And I do not want to do that at all. I will be very honest. I am critical, but not in a way that wants to blame and shame, ban and cancel, none of that stuff. We're playing with practice swords, people. These are, we're not playing with real swords here. This is just a critical examination of the practice, trying to take into account both pros and cons. So I just want to set that context right away. Thank you very much for leading me right into that.
Yeah, my pleasure. Yeah. And even though I think we will mention some specific projects today, I'm also at Stegmaier Games, we have made some deluxe things. And so I'm not just going to be talking about other creators, but we'll also talk a little bit about what we've done, not to self-promote what I've done, but rather to take accountability or talk about why sometimes publishers make really deluxe things and if those reasons are good or not.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And okay, so let's get into, so I have 6 points, and each of them is like has a pro and con aspect to it. Share it with Jamey so that we can get some previous reflection going, because I really want to do as much as I can to be thorough and represent many sides of the argument. So the first thing is the individual game. And it's a natural place to start, right? Because I think so what occasioned this was a Facebook post, at least for me. The Facebook post was reacting to another Twitter thread. I'm going to not say any names, just kind of be in general. And the original Twitter thread was very critical of the project, and it on the basis of like the game didn't deserve it. It is a mediocre game. Why are we deluxifying mediocrity? I think that's the phrase that was used, deluxified mediocrity, or whatever it is. And I want to just start there, because I actually don't agree with that. I think, any game, that's one of those things where that, like, if people like it, if you see enough of an audience, I mean, I don't want to bag on any particular game. If you want to have your, like, there are $4,000 deluxe sets of Monopoly, like with really nice gold plated, iron and hat and all that kind of stuff. So it's like any game can be deluxified. And so to isolate Tsuro, I mean, I don't know what your opinion on that is, or any particular game. I mean, what do you think about that?
Well, I really like the context that you're providing here, that we have people's love and enjoyment of games are highly subjective. And so for someone to say that this game doesn't deserve deluxification, or doesn't deserve a reprint, or doesn't deserve an expansion, I don't know, that's tough to respond to. I think you could say it better than I can, Jason, but I don't know if that's a great foundation for starting a discussion about it. But I'm glad that you were able to take it someplace constructive, so we can actually learn from this experience and learn from this Tsuro project that's on Kickstarter right now.
Yeah, I mean, so my criticism begins not with the initial game itself. Like, I don't want to do that for a bunch of reasons. Number one, people have their fun, right? I am. And I'll be perfectly honest, like, again, full disclosure over here, I did a preview for another one of these type projects for Castle Panic. So Castle Panic was a Kickstarter. The all-in package with all the expansions, minis, towers was like $30-$50. And that one got blowback too. And it's like, well, I did the preview. And they're sending me a copy of the base game deluxe, the deluxe version, as a compliment. I didn't get paid any money for it. Just like, it's a passion project for me. And so, I mean, I get it on a personal level in terms of like a passion project. And that's one of the things you wanted to talk about in terms of your notes. Like, I respect the fact that it is something that makes players happy, and it is something that makes designers happy as well.
That's the sense that I got looking at the Tsuro project page, that this is a passion project that's been in the works for a long time. The creator Ray, that Ray has been passionate about this game.
Ray Weers of Calliope Games.
And it was kind of neat to see that on the project page. The history of it and how much thought and time he's put into this. And I think that we all have our passion projects that we work on over the years. If you have a yard that you might garden your yard and landscape it over years and years and years, and even though that might cost, I don't know, gardening and landscaping might cost thousands of dollars over the years.
Ice sculpture in the back.
Yeah, totally. And so for someone else to walk by that yard and say, "Oh, what a waste! Why would you spend all that money on that? You could have spent that on a deluxe game instead." I don't know. It's as someone who works on passion projects myself, it's a little hard for me to hear that. And given what the project page seemed to indicate from Ray, it was kind of neat to see that he had put so much passion into this and was trying to share that passion with other people through the project. What do you think about that side of things? That we're going to talk, I think, a lot about the consumer side of it, but from the creator side of having this beautiful thing that you want to make, is it justified to try to make that and sell it, or are there some times where maybe a creator could just make it for themselves?
I mean, we're a consumerist hobby. I mean, this is, it would be so easy to fall into the trap of like, well, games should be for everybody, and like I have that spirit in me. I'm not gonna lie. But again, like I have to, like I did the preview for a $30-$50 game and had that, had I had the opportunity, like I'm not a Tsuro fan. But if it had a cooperative mode, which I know there's fan-made cooperative modes, and I'm on the One Stop Co-op Shop, and they said, "Hey, have do a preview." I know, especially when it comes to the smaller Okay, so especially when it comes to smaller creators, especially when it comes to games that people already like, right? So Tsuro is, no matter what you think of it, there's a fan base, right? So let's go into the cons of some of these projects. And so I think in terms of that whole expensive mediocrity type thing, so that's so a lot. In some ways, Tsuro, when it's 500 backers, so we're not talking about a million people. In a way, it kind of absorbed blowback that people have for other projects too. So it's like you see something that's like above $150, and it's like, oh, here we go. So we had Castles of Burgundy Deluxe, which is, as we're recording this, on GameFound right now at £2 million and around 16,000 backers, and posts, like going back and forth. Like, I know we'll get into like the whole back and forth about posting, but it's there. You have like a Foundations of Rome, which just came out from Arcane Wonders, which is a big project, and it's like, it is a Euro game, basically tiling, but like it's it's a huge project. And Simon is they release these things on a quarterly basis, in terms of the Marvels on beside. And so like it feels like every project is coming at it from a different perspective, and I'll talk about like the cumulative effect later. But just rating each individual project in their own, there's like I think some are better than others. Like, to be honest with you, I think that a proven game that has a fan base, it gets a deluxe edition, that's a lot different than just like a right out the gate, here's a bunch of stuff. And I think people might be reacting to like that, like the one thing as if it's the other thing. So I don't know. Like, so that's how I'll answer that question. What do you think about that?
Yeah, no, I'm glad you brought up that differentiation, because I think it is one thing to take a tried and tested product that has an audience. May not be everybody. Not everyone likes Tsuro. Not everyone likes Castles of Burgundy, but these are popular games that a significant number of people like. To take one of those and make a deluxe version versus the first appearance of a new game that maybe a few reviewers have seen, but most people have not played it, and to come out of the gates with a $150, $200 version of the game on Kickstarter or GameFound, I think that is a little different. That taps into a different type. We'll talk about fear of missing out in a little bit, but that taps into a different type of fear of missing out, I think. And it almost puts a little bit more of the risk on the backer. Like, I think there's a lot less risk for Castles of Burgundy. So people have had plenty of chances to try this game and know if they like it, opposed to a new game that hasn't been tried and tested.
Yeah, and so reading through some of the Castle stuff, because there's a lot more fans, a lot more back and forth, there was some really good comments about like, so what people want to know is, does it feel the same? Is it still the same game to play? Right. And because so many people have played it, I think I saw a lot of comments that said, okay, these particular blingy bits make it harder to play. I don't see things as well. And, I think there's like a tile placement. So like, the tiles are really nice and ornate, and they're hard. They don't like, there isn't like a pile of them. So like, okay, well, how are they going to make the random distribution? So asking all these great questions, but they can, because they've gotten the game before. And you can ask that question. I'll shout out Mark, the Thoughtful Gamer. He did a blog about Deluxification, and I think his end was some games, like the deluxe has to kind of match the gameplay. And that if the deluxe is just like there for the deluxe to kind of draw the eyeballs and draw the money and not enhance the gameplay, then now we're getting into some stuff. And then you go take the step down. It's like, now the deluxe is on, and by the way, when I say deluxe, I probably like plus $150 and like like really, really nice and gaudy, like a not necessary componentry. That's kind of what I mean by deluxe. When you are doing that to a new project and people can't make that decision, you don't give consumers that ability to kind of think through their product, then that's where it gets a little bit more difficult. But again, like if this podcast does anything, I want to give people the ability to kind of like differentiate some of this stuff and not be so reactive to just like the sticker shock.
Sure.
Okay. So then let's go to number 2. And I got this one from Brenna Noonan, who is my soul sister. If you're listening to this, Brenna, this is I got this because we went back and forth on Twitter a little bit. Brenna is like, this is Like, and so like, we call it a cash grab, right? That's one of the things that we say about these kind of projects. Oh, they're just trying to grab cash. And Brenna says, well, isn't that every business?
Yeah.
It's not you try to grab cash. One of the reasons I wanted to have Jamey on because a business owner and like can bring that perspective on there. And it's like, yeah, so getting under the hood of that, these deluxe versions, this is a pretty common practice. You can tell me about this. So it's like a lot of times a company, when they have a property they know people will like, they will amp it up. They'll put out the deluxe version as a way to build more capital. Right. And because Kickstarter can be scary. You never know what game is going to hit. But if you put out a deluxe version of a game people like, then it's a little bit more of a sure thing. Mm-hmm. Right. And not only that, you can totally speak to this. Like, it's actually not that, it's not that hard and it's not that expensive to like up the componentry a little bit. Like, you can really get some good return on investment in a deluxe edition. So maybe you could talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I think you said that perfectly there. Like, just knowing I'm working on a game right now that I've spent 5 years designing. I could have spent 2 months taking an existing game and just making it nicer. Like that it takes so much less time and investment. I mean, the investment in money is still there. Like with Tsuro or any of these games where you have a bunch of molds, you have a bunch of sunk costs that you're incurring, die cuts, things like that. But the investment in time between making a new product versus making a nicer version of a product that you already know works and functions and people have fun with it is massively significant, I think, between the two. So I absolutely agree with that.
Mm-hmm. I remember when you talked about Tapestry.
Yeah.
And like Tapestry came in at $100.
Yeah.
And our MSRP, $100 American MSRP. And I remember reading some of your posts about it because, like, like there were some componentry choices that were like a little bit nicer than, you could have maybe reduced it like, $5-10, but the componentry difference was stark, if I remember. So maybe talk people through like, some of the guts of how decisions get made about like what quality componentry that you include in your games.
Yeah, I mean, for most of the games that we make, there's only one version of the game. There are a few exceptions to that. Red Rising, one of our more recent games, we made a collector's edition, and we made a retail version.
It's somewhere. It's right there.
Yeah. But Tapestry, I just decided to make one version of the game because oftentimes I want to make our games feel deluxe, but to be accessible to as many people as possible. And I know $100 is not accessible to as many people as possible. But in the instance of Tapestry, it was the difference between using these big pre-painted miniatures as for your capital city or using tiles. And tiles probably would have dropped the cost of the game, the MSRP of the game, the price, to around $80, maybe a little bit higher, maybe a little bit lower. But we're still in that category of pretty expensive game out of the box then. And so I was like, okay, well, if we're already at $80, I want to make what I think is a really beautiful civilization game out of the box. But if that difference had been, it's a $40 game versus an $80 game, that's a different conversation there. That's an area where I might have gone with two different games, a deluxe one and a retail version of the game, that type of thing. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I mean, the publisher is making that decision all the time, and they're trying to get sales. And that's what, at the end of the day, that's what it's all about. So it's like, okay, if the consumer is saying that, we really want this kind of cheaper version, then, that's what they're going to get. Oftentimes, like someone like me will say, is this really necessary? Because I could be a real Luddite when it comes to my componentry, but the sales don't say that. Like the sales say, that in the aggregate, people want the nicer stuff and they're willing to pay the extra for the nicer stuff. So it's like, how is a publisher supposed to say no to that? How is this publisher supposed to be like, why do they have to be kind of the moral agent in the system? At the end of the day, they're trying to get capital, and the best companies take that capital and reinvest it in the rest of their product. So, Calliope Games, and I go back to Tsuro because that's an example, I think, of how to do it right. Is A, it's a tried and true product for some people, and B, like Calliope Games isn't some boutique thing. Like they make family friendly, accessible games, and I think soaking the rich a little bit and using that capital to make broadly accessible games. I mean, that sounds great, right?
Well, I think one other key element there too is that Calliope has not said we're done making the $35 version of Tsuro. We're only making the $350 version now. People might find this campaign, discover the campaign, or discover the game through this campaign, and check out their game store, their local game store, for the very cheap version of the game. So they've taken out that. Well, there is some fear of missing out. Again, we'll talk about that later. Fear of missing out on the super deluxe version, but they haven't monopolized the market for the game and said, this is the only way that you can get it now. They're still making the game very accessible to other people. And I appreciate that. I'm curious what you think about that when you see a Kickstarter campaign that only has the deluxe version. Is that a red flag to you when they only have the $150 version of the game, when they could have offered the $70 version, but they didn't? What do you think about that when you find this?
Funny you mentioned that. I actually would rather, for existing property, or actually for any property, and I speak from a psychotherapist, there is a difficulty when you offer both tiers, because what happens is, and you kind of like offer both tiers at once, and it's like, okay, pledge, like you have the little windows, and it's like, okay, I could buy the $40 game with the standees and the tiles and the cardboard and everything, but then this $70 game is like standing there with the metal coins and the whatever die cut player boards, all the little things that gamers love. And actually something along these lines came along with Terraforming Mars Ares Expedition, where they kickstarted it. And there was a whole like mess about timing. I'm not going to talk about the timing aspect of it, but like they kickstarted like a nicer version, and then they released a target version. And there is a class of gamer who thought the target version was garbage. And it just, so it's like, okay, well, give me this. And then, so if you have a gamer who is kind of on the fence and they're like, well, it's only $20. Like, that's where you get into a little bit of like, are people really making the rational decision to get the improved thing, or are they doing it to keep up with the Joneses? Or are they doing it because, like, when they, because let's say you playing and you take a picture of it and you post it on Facebook, you're going to get a comment that says, well, why did you get the deluxe version?
Yeah.
It's the human beings. And like, I can see people saying, well, I don't know, you shouldn't care about that. But it's like, it happens. And that does create pressure on people to be like, well, I don't want to like get the janky version. I want to get the good version. So like putting them so close together can be a difficulty. I almost like, the Castles of Burgundy thing. I know they're doing like tiers thing, and that's a little bit much, but like, just feature the deluxe thing. Like, people can get the original, the base game if they want to elsewhere. So that's fine.
On that campaign, even the base game is, I think it's $85 plus shipping. So that's just to get the most basic version of it, which to me is still a lot. Yeah.
For that game.
That game,
Castle Burgundy, very smooth, easy game. And I have the Castles of Burgundy card game. It's enough for me. The thing is cheap as heck. I love that thing. Okay, so point number 3, Deluxe, and this is kind of a pro mostly on the Deluxe side. I've alluded to this. Like, Deluxe has always been with us. Let's be honest. Like, and it's not just, I mean, there's board gaming. I mentioned it before, but like Deluxe Monopoly, Deluxe Chess. Are you kidding me? Like, people are spending thousands of dollars on their like really nice crystal, chess sets on marble boards and etched and inlaid, all that kind of thing. I mean, we had like, $300 Catan has been with us for a very, very long time. And that was when $300 was like $500 now. So it's like even more expensive. And so like even comic books, you've always had like, foil editions and, different covers and like laser, like we've always had Deluxe with us. So I think like, I just wanted to put that in there because I think some folks in the conversation, like if we're criticizing this project, that we're criticizing just Deluxification in general. And it's like, no, we're not doing it. You can't. It's just like a human instinct to want to have the nicer thing if you can afford it. So I think so. And there's a further thing, and I want to ask you about this. Like, not only is Deluxe okay, it's kind of a sign of a healthy hobby, and that there's like Deluxe actually plays a role in making the hobby broader in the sense that like, okay, people come in, they see the nice stuff, and then it leads them down, like, because they're drawn to it, and they don't just like stay there, they kind of lead them down further to the hobby. Like, you make really nice games, Jamey. Like you and I know you don't make like the blingy, super blingy games, but like Wingspan is nice. Those eggs are nice. And like,
Yeah.
other things side, like you had kickstarted that with the metal coins and everything. Those are nice.
Yeah.
So like, what do you think about the idea that Deluxe is like an active draw and like a healthy part of the hobby?
Yeah, I mean, from a marketing perspective, I think about games in terms of hooks. Like I want all of our games to have a mechanical hook, a thematic hook, and at least one component hook, like something when you pass it on that, when you see it on Instagram or you walk by a table at a convention or even at a game night and you see a game on the table, and you're drawn to it for some reason. I design games around that reason. There should be something that hooks players in. You mentioned the bird feeder dice tower and the eggs and wingspan. They do add a little bit to the cost, but I think they're worth it for that hook. Not just for marketing, but also just for the play experience to have eggs instead of cardboard tokens for eggs like that. But I always make sacrifices for that. Like with Wingspan, there are cardboard food tokens in Wingspan, because if we had added wood tokens, that would have increased the price another probably $15. And I wanted Wingspan to be as accessible to as many people as possible. So yeah, it's all about, I think, engaging, like what is enough to hook people and to make them really happy that the game's on the table in front of them, versus pricing them out of the game altogether.
Right. Like I spoke with Andrew Fisher, who is one of the developers of the new Descent, Descent Journey to the Dark, Descent 3E or whatever it is. And I asked him about, because that game was $175 game, like right out the box. Yeah. And he's like, okay, we could have made a cheaper game, but the multi-level dungeons, like the cardboard that you fit together so you can like walk your mini all around. It has this like kind of like physical presence, and that just creates a draw for people. Like I can only like, as he was speaking, I was like, okay, 15-year-old me, if I was 15 years old walking into like a game store or a library and I saw that thing, what would I do? And I have to admit myself, I would have been like, ooh. Ooh. so yeah, I mean, I think like there's a lot to say, and this so far I think people are getting the sense that I want to lay out the pros. I have some cons coming, but I do want to lay out the pros. There's a lot to say for Deluxe, so this is in no way kind of bagging on people for liking it or for saying it's like a terrible thing, but let's start to get into some of the critical points. So we're going to get to our number 4. Yeah. Okay, so the number 4 is the impact on the hobby as a whole, impact on the games themselves and on the publishers. And the way I think of it is I distinguish, maybe this is a little bit of a false distinction, but we have to start somewhere. I distinguish between like the mass hobby, like the mass market, just middle class, so to speak, and the top of the hobby. So the top of the hobby, they got the bucks. They got the bucks, and it's almost like, at some point, like, creators realize that, like, wow, I could do anything and they'll buy it. How many expansions can I put in there? They're backing 600, 700, 800. And like, there's an aspect of the market in gaming that could just, that finds the way and they find the bucks for it. So like, I distinguish those two things. I distinguish like the top of the market from the broad market. And so the paradigm is, and I really want to get into this and I really need your help. The Deluxe feeds that top market. The top market is asking for it, and here you go. There you go. And generally, like we get more complex games, and we get like nicer games, like driven by that top of the market because they can afford it and they're hobbyists, they want it. Does that materially impact the middle? Is there a way in which feeding that top of the market shapes the publishers, shapes the gamers, somehow like, takes away from the strength of the middle of the hobby, that broadly accessible area? So it's an open question. We'll start there and then we can kind of dive in.
Well, this is a topic that I'm really curious to hear what people have to say in the comments, but I think it's a great question. And I'm almost going to throw it back at you a little bit here, because one of the projects I looked at for this was Simon's Marvel Zombicide. And the top, I was very curious how expensive the top reward was and how many people backed it. And the top reward was a little over $600 to get all in everything. There's a bunch of exclusives in there, tons of stuff.
Galactus, Maxi,
Galactus, yeah.
Like a 3-foot Galactus that people can just have. And then the shipping was a little bit crazy, but we don't even worry about that.
Oh yeah, the shipping is even, that's even more, probably hundreds of dollars on top of that.
Yeah.
And I thought when I saw that price, I was like, okay, that top of the market that you're talking about, maybe 1,000 people. 6,000 people back to that level. 6,000 people.
So many people.
And so I wonder when I see that number, I mean, I wonder a lot of things about that number. Like how many, are there 6,000 people that can really afford that? Are some of those people confusing wants with needs? Are they buying something they can't afford? And to bring it back to your question a little bit is when those 6,000 people get that, all that stuff for the game, how does that impact the rest of the hobby? Like that's great for their tabletop. If they can afford it and they have fun with it, that's awesome. But for the friends who see it and then can't buy the extra stuff, for everyone else, for the other billion people in the world, or 8 billion people in the world who are not those 6,000 people, what does it do to them psychologically, economically? What do you think?
Actually, I'll get to that in the last point in terms of the impact on gamers.
Yes,
I mean, I wonder. So, okay, 6,000 people backing at $600 some odd dollars. Like, so when I talk about impact on the hobby itself and impact on publishers and people who are making the games, it's exactly what I'm talking about. So it's like, it's almost like a giant honeypot of money, you know, and does it, from a publisher perspective, does somebody look at the honeypot and say, ooh, okay, I'm going to, you know, shift focus. You know, I normally would kind of like put a lot of focus into trying, you know, finding the new designer, finding innovative games, finding, kind of going to different corners and getting stuff that I might be able to sell to a broad market. But someone sees that, you know, and again, and it's not just that. It's like, you know, Castle Burgundy is at £2 million. It's a very successful project. And you know, like they said before, Marvel Zombies had 6,000 backs at the top level, and all these other projects, when they're good, they cha-ching. Does a publisher make a decision and say, okay, I'm going to take and divert energy away from the making broadly appealing games and put that energy towards the top of the market? And like, that's conceptual. Like, I guess I'm wondering, has that happened? Like, do the stats bear out that publishers are putting more energy into it? Because that's a feeling that people have. Right. Like that is an absolute feeling that like this stuff is having a distortionary effect on what they're getting.
I think you're definitely, I think that is a valid theory, a valid hypothesis there. I think that we've seen that happen over the last few years. That is an extreme, a $600 reward where 6,000 people back it. That is an extreme. But over the years, more and more, I have seen and heard Kickstarter being an outlet, for better or worse, because I think there's some positives to it, like we've mentioned, for creators to put that really deluxe version on crowdfunding, whereas it wouldn't. Most games of that price don't have a retail lifespan. They don't. Target, like mass market stores aside, even in a hobby game store, there are very few games that are over $100, and even far fewer that are under $200. So crowdfunding has almost become the place to put those games. And I could definitely, well, as a creator, that is not enticing to me. Oddly enough, I mean, I don't want to go that route, because when I spend so much time and effort making a game, I want it to be for ideally 100,000 people, not 6,000 people. But I could totally see that being enticing. I mean, that alone, 600 people, $6,000 or 6,100, you know, it's a lot of money. It's a lot of money for a creator to look at and say, okay, I want that too. I want to give that a try.
And so, like, is that happening on some broad level? So you mentioned before Target and that, like other broadly available games. And you mentioned before, just you have a spirit of, okay, that sounds great, but I still want to make broadly available games. And you are the publisher of Wingspan. And so it's like, okay. So we get into the counter argument, and I'll quote Jason Matthews. I know I'm name dropping a lot, but like these are Twitter conversations, and like I think these people would, you know, totally stand by what they're saying here. And so their perspective is that no evidence exists that any distortion's happening. As a matter of fact, just gaming has just gotten more broad. So like, okay, we may see more deluxe versions, but we're also seeing an explosion at the middle as well. You can go into Target, you can buy all sorts of games. So like, you know, like my one of the things I said was like, okay, how many games are in the Million Club, right? And it's like most of the million had sold. So that most of them came kind of before 2016, you know, like the Catons and the Ticket to Ride and Carcassonne and Dixit. So those are in the million units sold club. And that's 2010 was like, and 2014 was like, these are golden age for like everybody was playing those games. So I'm looking at it going, okay, are we not getting as many of those games? We got Wingspan busted through, but like, the prints are a little bit smaller. I'm skeptical about the impact of like the crowdfunding thing. However, people are, they say, look at the sales. Look at the sales of Azul. Look at the sales of Codenames. Look at the sales of Cascadia. We did a playthrough of it in One Stop Co-op Shop. I think Cascadia is like the latest, like really good, like broadly available game.
Yeah.
Right. The sales are strong here. And I'm like, okay, are they really that strong? Are they comparable to the thing? So maybe, do you have a perspective on that? Like, is the middle strong? Do we have a good middle, broadly accessible? Are we at a good space there in the hobby?
I think in terms of games that break through, like some of the games that you've mentioned, I think it is a pretty strong middle right now. I mean, those codenames Azul, Cascadia. I'm biased towards Wingspan, but I think Wingspan has brought a lot of joy to people.
Which, by the way, you didn't even anticipate when you first made it.
I had no idea. That's my hope for every game to break through, but I think it happens so rarely for any game. Wingspan sold, I think, 1.4 million copies at this point. I think Azul has sold over 3 million. I don't know Cascadia's numbers. Codenames must have sold over 2-3 million at this point. Yeah, I mean, those games have broken through. I think we're seeing, there's so many more games released now that I think the odds are that something is going to break through every now and then and make a splash in that way. Arc Nova, we're seeing that this year from Arc Nova, from a much heavier game. I think that game has broken through in a special way. Are the Marvel zombicides of the world getting in the way of that middle?
Or taking energy from, or like publishers who would normally, look for the innovative product or something. Like our company's really making that decision. It's like, okay, now we're not going to do the broad. We're going to serve the top. Like, we see that in a lot of different media, right? I mean, when I was a kid, there were all these kind of like, just mid-market movies, $10 million budget, very solid, Fight Club or American Dream or, your normal Spielberg movie, or like, these weren't like big budget things, but they were like, they had some investment, broadly available, everybody could see it. Nowadays, there's no middle. Like it's either $300,000, a $300 million production plus, or like indie. Very little in the middle. In sports, try going to a stadium or like a football game or something like that. Like you're in for hundreds of dollars. So like the middle is shut out. So I think there's a sense that as things move along, as things mature, prices will go up and like things will become more exclusionary. The middle might get shut out. What a lot of commenters said, and what you seem to be saying, is that that's not quite true in board games.
That is not quite true, but I know you have a con here, and I think it's a very interesting way to put it. So Nate, show the other side. Do you think? I mean, you can say it here because I've seen what you've written out in your outline here, but I think it's really interesting. Yeah.
Okay.
Go ahead and say yeah.
Okay, so you mentioned Arc Nova, you mentioned Wingspan. So I do think that in terms of, I think of it like a gravity, right? So that top of the hobby almost like exerts gravity to make stuff nicer and more expensive. So like in days of yore, it would be the Catan. And Catan's at $39 million. So I don't know if we'll ever see that again, but like, I really hope that we do. But Catan is so easy. Like I could teach a family to play Catan. And I know gamers think Wingspan is easy, but it's not. It's not. Like we had, if people haven't seen it, the Mandy Patakin like viral video, he's sitting there, orthogonal. What's that? I feel like this is what did Alex say it? He's like, I feel like this is an IQ test for idiots and I'm failing. Like he couldn't get it. So so like, this is more about the complexity of it, but like in terms of also the cost, because Wingspan's not a cheap game and Arc Nova is not a cheap game. So like so we do have examples of games that bust through, like like Cascadia, anybody can play. That's cool. And I don't want to say that there's no games. And I'm very sorry if I gave that impression, like, okay, there's no games ever. But I do think that of the games that burst through, they're a little bit more complex, a little bit less accessible, and a little bit more pricey. Just even the ones that burst through. So like we've raised the floor. And I think it's just an open question to ask. Is that gravity coming from the top of the hobby? Is that having at least a little bit of an effect of, raising it past where others would feel welcome in the hobby?
I think if you had posed that question maybe 10 years ago, I would have been really, really concerned. But now there's so many games being created. Even just the other day on Kickstarter, there were a bunch of very accessible kind of family weight games launched. I backed First in Flight, which looks to be a very accessible deck building game about the first flight in the US at least. And so there's so many games being created now, but that I think there's space for a lot of different games to coexist, and for games like Arc Nova to break through. But like if Arc Nova had broken through 10 years ago, I think I would have been concerned that designers and publishers would have focused almost too much on really heavy games and not on these more accessible games. But now for every person who loves Arc Nova, including myself, for every designer who loves it, I think there are going to be many designers who don't want to design a game that heavy, that want to design the next Werewolf or the next Azul or Codenames.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we're still getting that. We're still getting people who want to design the next Werewolf, and they're able to find a platform. So, I mean, as a person who publishes Wingspan, like, I mean, the last million, copy thing, at least now, at least the most recent one. I mean, is it harder to get attention in this current environment?
Yeah. I don't think it's necessarily related only to the really deluxe games that we're talking about today, but more so due to the sheer number of games and the sheer number of good, beautiful games being produced. Like I think it puts maybe a healthy amount of pressure and accountability on publishers like my company and any publisher, any creator, to only put their best foot forward, to only release the best of the best. And even then still hope that it breaks through. We only release 1 or 2 new games a year. Rather than casting a wide net, we could release a dozen games a year and hope that one breaks through. But that's, in my opinion, that's almost a different topic. But that's, diluting it even more rather than putting our best foot forward. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Okay. So then we'll get to number 5. Number 5 is a straight up con, and it's something that no one talks about. I'm not going to go into it too much. But I mean, what are we putting into these games? We're when we talk about we'll get back to the big deluxe versions now. I know we got into a little bit of sidebar about nicer games and everything. But I'm happy, at least for now, that some people think that the middle is well served and we're okay with that. I'm willing to kind of adjust my own thinking on that. So I'll leave it there. Getting back to the deluxe games, they're filled with plastic, they're filled with metal, they're filled, and especially plastics. I mean, when we're talking like the nicer games, I mean, it's mostly plastics. And like, are we in this moment of like, climate change and the environment and sustainable games? And I don't know how much Stegmaier's done. I think you did have like a blog about sustainable games. Like, there is no question. We have to say these deluxe versions are just horrendous. And just like in general, I think the hobby has tended towards, like, I did a pod recently with Jonah over at the One Pip Wonder, and she was saying, like, I mean, games are less environmentally friendly now than they were 10 years ago, because there's just so much more plastic, UV spot coating and all the adhesives on cards, and there's also things that make us less friendly. And this deluxeification is taking us even further in that direction. It's almost like we're taking the car and careening it, towards the worst things. And so that does need to be said as well.
I agree. The one, I'm going to point the finger at myself here a little bit, because the one thing I'd say is that for a game like the Tsuro Deluxe Edition, that they might end up making 1,000 copies of based on the current backer trends, I think Wingspan has done considerably more harm to the environment than those 1,000 copies, because we've made 1.4 million copies of entire sets of plastic eggs and plastic inserts and plastic trays, opposed to 1,000 copies of some metal components. I agree with you. I mean, Marvel is a different story. There must be so much plastic in that $600 version of Marvel's Zombicide.
And you mentioned the trays. Like, I think that's also a thing. Like, I mean, I think it was Mex vs. Minion was the first company that did the game trays with the Z, and like, it's just beautiful trays. And I think that I don't know if Stegmaier, you did. Like, I think Side Ride the Fenders had like a decent little like tray system and everything, and you've played with the trays. Like, and that's such an underrated part of the experience. But like, as we have served the top of the hobby, like, the demand for nice trays has exploded. I've heard companies complain about it all the time. Do you feel that on your end?
Oh yeah. I mean, I feel it, and I see people talk about it on social media all the time. Whenever I post a photo of like parks, beautiful game, an environmentally themed game. People love the insert. I love the insert in parts. It's a beautiful insert. They really did a great job building that insert. And that's like the first comment always. Oh, they did. And I can see other people, see other publishers, designers seeing that and be like, oh, I want that too. I want this reaction to it too. I want to make a nice insert so people talk about it. For Wingspan, we're actually in the process of making a cardboard pulp tray to permanently replace the plastic tray. Okay. And we were actually also replacing the plastic eggs with wooden eggs that I think even look better than the plastic eggs. But the plastic and the eggs there are completely interchangeable. Like, you will not be able to tell the difference. The tray though, the technology to make a cardboard pulp tray is not anywhere close to the technology for making a fancy plastic tray. So it's okay. It gets the job done, but I get the temptation there. We're talking about kind of publisher temptations, designer temptations there to make a beautiful plastic tray versus this more expensive, uglier, environmentally friendly version. Mm-hmm. It's tough. Right. Yeah.
And listening to the publishers, like the publisher is saying, okay, we'll do what the players want. Like we're not here to a flag wave and maybe certain things, but like in terms of quality of life stuff and how the games look and how the game how things are stored, like we're gonna just do what the players want. And if we're not going to demand cardboard trays, if we're not going to demand more eco-friendliness, then we're not going to get it. So I mean, and so insofar as like Deluxification represents like a total like turn away from that, I just wanted to put it out there like that as a con. So like, and it also explains some of the when somebody sees, it's not just the sticker shock, it's like all that plastic. There is a quarter of the people that are going like, oh, I don't know about that. So that's just explaining, some of the pushback that some of the apps. Okay, so that's number 5. So let's go to the last one. And this is something I know you are interested in. We talked about it on the, you mentioned it before, and I'm definitely interested because I'm a psychotherapist, and it's the impact on the gamers, our psychology and our communities. What does Deluxe do? Right. And I just mentioned it before because you asked the question about like, having Deluxe and regular in the same way, like, or in the same like project kind of one-to-one. As human beings, we have this kind of gravitational pull towards the nicer thing. And the gravitational pull, we call it FOMO. Fear of missing out, if people don't know. And it's weird because like the way we talk about FOMO has become this, oh, it's my FOMO. And it becomes like this kind of cute thing, but it's not cute for a decent amount of people. And we're in a space of like, we don't want to talk about how not cute it is because we'll get, someone will inevitably say, well, you just got to make the right decision for yourself. And it's like, that's not how humans work. Like we're social beings, and we want the nicer thing because we don't want to like have this imagined feeling that like, oh, well, I don't want to miss out with it if everybody else is playing. Like it's just under the hood psychological. And I know you have some perspectives on that.
Yeah, I mean, well, this is a big topic. One little part of it that I think a lot about is, and you just mentioned this in the previous topic too, what consumers are asking for. Like when you have fans of an existing brand in particular, and they are actively asking for something, is it always the right thing for the publisher to say yes? Right. The example for this with my company is Scythe and the metal mechs that we made for Scythe. People were asking us for a long time, will you make metal mechs? We think this would be really cool. And there was a tipping point where enough people said that where I was like, okay, maybe it would be cool. And we made them. We made metal mechs for Scythe. It's the most expensive product that we've ever made, especially given what you get for it. It's $50 for 9 metal mechs. And then you can get a full set for your entire game if you spend $200, which to me is outrageous. As a consumer, I would not pay that, but enough people asked for it that we did it. And sometimes I still feel a little guilty about that. And there are other times where I just say no, where I'm like, I don't, as a I feel like I need to look out for you in some way, me talking to the customer. And I don't think this is a healthy thing for me to make because I bet you will buy it. And I don't want you to spend the money on this thing. And so there's this weird balance, I think, between publisher accountability towards their customers balanced against what customers are actively asking for. What do you think about that as a psychotherapist? Where does the responsibility or the accountability lie there?
Okay, so this is a psychotherapy thing, but it's also like fish criticizing water thing. Like, I mean, we're soaked in like what you just said, right? What you just said is like so against the capitalist ethos, and this is what we're in. We're in a capitalist consumerist system. And by saying that, by doing my socialist thing, I guess I am. And so much of this conversation, for me anyway, I think people take it as, okay, is it right for the person to buy it? I'm like, I don't want to focus on the person. I want to focus on the ecosystem. How healthy is our ecosystem? And we need, part of what we need is publishers who do that, right? Who say, okay, this was what the market says, but the market is a sociopath. Like the market, the market does not care. Like if the market sold milk to a cat, and if the market sold milk to a baby, like it would choose the cat if it could get more money. Like it wouldn't care. Like, I mean, it's just like it doesn't have morals like that. So like when I see people in the comments saying, well, let the market decide. Well, the market could like take us into all sorts of crazy directions. The market might decide like, well, smoke a bunch of Juul, and I compare it to like addictions, and maybe that's a little bit strong, but is like retail therapy can be an addiction. And browsing on Kickstarter, like because we get the emails like projects we love, and all those things. Like if you're plugged into the crowdfunding community. And I'll focus on actually this will be a little bit of a sidebar, because I did get this this feedback too, that like this is a lot of what we're talking about is an online thing. Like if you go to the hobby stores, then like it doesn't play out nearly this way. You go to the hobby store, you're gonna play Azul, you're gonna play you're not gonna deal any of this stuff. It's mostly an online like kind of phenomenon. So like that's an open question. I don't know if you have any perspective on this. Like how much of the hobby is online and how much of the hobby is just in gamer stores? Like, is it just like a little internet bubble that we're complaining about here? Or does this have a broader effect that we should be discussing?
I mean, for these games that break through, I think the initial crowdfunding campaign or pre-order campaign is very, very small compared to the final audience. But for the games that don't break through, or even maybe Marvel Zombicide, they probably will have a version of it that they sell in retail and that is somewhat successful. But for most of those pledge levels, this is probably the only time that people will ever be able to get them, which ties, I think, way deep into that FOMO. So like that, I think people are looking at it and knowing this is never going to be on a retail shelf. I'm never going to see this in my local store. I need to make a decision now, even if it hurts my budget, even if I can't afford it. That to me is a little scary.
And people make those decisions. So getting back to the online thing, like the online thing is where, like, first of all, more of us are online than ever due to COVID, right? And like, even though we're like kind of like maybe depending on where you are post-COVID area, we're still like we habituate ourselves online. You look at some of the gaming groups. Facebook groups have 50K people, and there's very active posting. r/board games have 3 million registered users over on Reddit. BGG has 2 to 3 million unique accounts. It's 5 million in traffic. I mean, we're talking, these are big numbers. Even if they're not like online all the time, it's like you log on and the first thing you see on BGG is an ad banner.
Yeah.
And so for something nice, like then like sometimes it's Cascadia, but a lot of times it's Castles of Burgundy, $30 to $50. Or you go onto the Facebook groups and they use banner ads too. So to say that this is like, well, just get away from the online and like focus on just the in-person play experience, is the in-person play experience harmed? Well, I mean, it's the online part of it is still an important part of the ecosystem. I'll say that. And especially for the deeper hobbyist, which is this show is for the more committed gamer hobbyist. Like they're gonna encounter this stuff, right? And when they're encountering this stuff, does happiness emerge? And I think like so I'll say that. So like I don't want to be very specific that like I'm not saying okay, well, all of board gamers and all that kind of thing, but I do want to say that for the hobbyist who is engaging with this stuff at all online, and this is in the millions, this isn't like a corner thing. I think that there are these little tugs, in the so we'll get back to the main topic. So like in terms of like wants and needs, right? So we have I want a game. Like nobody needs board games. Right. I don't need this. I could throw this away tomorrow and like I'll be fine. And we're in a hobby where no one like really quote unquote needs anything in terms of like needing food, shelter, all that kind of thing. Right. But we do have a need to belong, and we do have a need to want to share and have what we share be accepted. So like if I have a game and I want to take a picture of it, or if I want to like be a frequent poster on a forum, which some people that's a social need for them because maybe they don't get out. I know I'm conventing some things, but like really, this is a lot of folks. You know, you go on some of these groups and this is really a lot of the same people that are posting. And it's like, you know, we take for granted that like they're making happy decisions that with their games, but then you'll have also the occasion of post of like, well, I lost my job. Now I have to clear out my collection.
Right. Yeah.
You'll have, I've heard this from publishers, like they close down their crowdfunding and they'll get an email from somebody like, I got to back out. Please give me a refund. I really couldn't afford it. This was a really big mistake. And they're giving like the sob story. And the publisher is like, well, because, you know, it's easy for y'all to be like, okay, so the print game's not for you. I'll probably sell another copy of it. There you go. But like on the person end, they're like, oh my God, I made a huge mistake. And, and I just don't think we talk about that deeper end enough.
Yeah. Oh no, I'm glad you brought that up. Yeah, it's been a while since I've run a Kickstarter campaign, but there were definitely stories like that from people who lost their job like the day after the campaign ended, or something, you know, a big medical bill came up, and there are certainly those instances, and just how close those lines are between being financially sound and suddenly not being financially sound, and to have an expensive game be the difference between whether or not you can pay your bills from month to month is that's a lot. That's a lot of pressure for all of us, I think.
Yeah. And that's what I'm talking about. So like maybe it's a person can afford it if things all stay the same, but it's like these games are pretty expensive. And it's like, you know, and you know, I think the stat in the United States is like, you know, I think 60% of our population does not have $400 in the bank. You know, and that's a huge amount of people. And like, you need that $400 to be able to afford 3 games. The way things are right now, especially if you're kind of online plugged in, Kickstarter, all that kind of thing. So like, there are people who kind of, they kind of hew very close to their budget, or they don't they don't budget. And then, you know, they end up kind of getting in trouble for it. And I think in our community, there's an instinct to say, well, it's on them. You know, they need to be the one budgeting. They need to be the one, whatever. And okay. I'm not denying that, but is there to what you said, is there a responsibility on the publisher end? Because in the publisher end, they're not thinking of that. Again, market is a sociopath. So then like they're in this context where like in the online space, at least every week we get some of these things. Seemingly every week or every month, depending on what, or like, you know, if we have like a bountiful Tuesday, you know, I like a creator will post on like Sunday and they're like, watch out for Tuesday, save your bucks for Tuesday. And then you're soaked in this stuff. You know, and it's like, you know, constant like exposure to, you know, if you're going to be in an online space and, you know, you could say that it's like, well, don't be online. Well, then you've cut off a very valuable social resource for somebody.
Yeah. I mean, I'm really glad you went through those online stats, because it's impossible to avoid, even if you're just someone who is on Instagram and likes to scroll through Instagram now and then, or Facebook. I think Instagram is particularly easy to scroll through.
Sure.
There's so many photos, beautiful photos of games on tables. It's unavoidable. I don't think you can avoid that as someone who is even just a little curious about games, much less someone who is immersed in the hobby and loves discovering new games and loves talking about games online.
And okay, so I think people might come to that. It's like, okay, what's the big deal? Right? What's the big deal of seeing these things? I mean, and so this is where I being my background as a psychotherapist, and like what the effect of inequality can have on people. And so I'm going to quote a study, National Library of Medicine, and there's a billion of these studies, but just one that happened when I pulled up that was recent. Our systematic review included 26 studies, kind of a meta review, mostly from high-income countries. Nearly 2/3 of all studies and 5 out of 6 longitudinal studies, longer ones, reported a statistically significant positive relationship between income inequality and risk of depression. What does that mean? A positive relationship between those two things? I think in the abstract, we're okay with inequality. Like if someone has and someone doesn't have in the abstract, we're able to kind of make that happen. And if we're well off, like, you know, if we can afford the game, then we're okay with that too. but most of us can't like make those decisions. So like when we see it posted in our face every single day, and this the nature of advertising, like, from a publisher perspective, they're just pressing the Facebook button, ad, and like, just project, like that has a long-term just risk, impact on our happiness, because it's a reminder, here's something I can't buy. Here's a reminder of our unequal world. Here's a reminder that like I'm a teacher and I should be making 4 times what I make, but I don't, because and I say that because there's a lot of teachers that are in the hobby. Mm-hmm. I can't tell you how many times I sat down, it's like, well, I'm a teacher for a living. Well, how many teachers can afford this?
Yeah.
How many teachers can afford $350 Tsuro? I think we take for granted that like, and we say it's so easy to say, well, it's their fun, let them do it. And I think we're inclined to say that, but there's still going to be that tug, that social tug of like, why can't I afford that? And I'm not saying that publishers shouldn't do it. What I am saying is maybe think twice about just going for that honeypot. And like, am I really putting joy out into the world when I do this thing? And it sounds like, so go back to Tsuro, Ray, this is a years-long project, and this is a joy. And so like, and Calliope Games does not do this very often. So like for them, I don't have a problem with that, but like there are companies that go to the well frequently. There are companies that don't need it and they do it anyway because, money, but there's a cost, a social cost. And I guess that's really where I wanted to, be in this conversation.
When, as a publisher and designer, I hear you, and I hope other publishers hear that too. Just the idea that the decisions that we make in terms of what products that we make and how we price them, and how deluxe we make them, even though the intent is often people are asking for it, or it's a passion project, or we're trying to bring joy to tabletops, that the outcome can be, as you said in this quote here, can be a reminder of inequality. It can cause depression. It can be psychologically damaging to people, which I don't think it's never the intent of a publisher to do that, but just the reminder that you've said that, and made us more aware of that, I think is so important. So I think that's the number one reason I'm grateful that you included me in this conversation, because that is such an important reminder.
Yeah. And I know I'm going to get it. I know I'm going to get so much energy. And if you're warming up that comment, then, try to think twice, because I've answered that comment 20 times. The whole thing of like, well, it's on the consumer. They got to know what's on the budget. They got like, this is not about like personal decisions, personal responsibility. That's a part of the conversation. That's how I'll say it. That's a part of the conversation. Like, I don't think that we can move past the fact that we're social animals too. And we want to feel like we belong, want to feel like we're in a healthy space, it's welcoming and everything. And, like the online space, at least, maybe in the game store is a little bit different because, like you said before, these big deluxe versions don't make it there. That's not the place for them. Like it's very much in the online space, but I don't think we can dismiss it that easily because more and more of us are here. Yeah. And this is the center of the hobby, in terms of like, the really passionate people, the evangelists, so to speak, who are spreading the gospel of board gaming to others. So like, I think there's a very important part of the hobby, part of ecosystem, and having all this, like the blingy stuff. And again, I don't want to pick on one person, a project, it's multiple. Mm-hmm. It is a constant stream of this stuff. I think it's having a, like people wonder, like, why are we so unhappy? Why do we put someone, this part of it? Yeah. Advertising is a part of it, like the constant advertising, the constant hyping. I like to say hype is the engine, but like cynicism and depression are the exhaust. One comes with the other because we're social beings. And I just wanted an opportunity to, say that, but backed up by someone who can really, bring the numbers, bring the perspectives, bring the experience. Thank you very much for helping me explore this topic.
I appreciate that. And also just to speak to those who are about to comment, and I hope they do, because I look forward to reading the comments and the questions below, who might say, Jamey, you've done, like, how can you be a part of this conversation when you've done this with the metal mechs, with with tapestry, with other products like that? And you are right. Like that is valid. That is a valid thing for you to say. I hear you. And I am open to that criticism and that conversation in the comments below. Let's talk about that. This is not just me talking about other publishers. This is about me talking about choices that I've made as well. So
well, you
yeah,
made
I
Rolling
really
Realms
look
too.
forward and Rolling, yeah, we made a $20 game as well. Yeah, absolutely.
I hope you make more $20 or $40
Me too.
games or something like that. Okay. Okay. So that's where we're going to leave it. Again, I'm very excited to, engage with people, both in the comments below, but also wherever I post in like the Facebook groups and Twitter and all that kind of thing. So, let us know what's going on with Stegmaier very quickly. A very popular project, has a lot of people talking. Viticulture World is releasing pretty soon.
Yeah. This is actually one where we did the expansion by itself, and then there's a wine crate version of it that's sold out in the US right now. But we'll make more at some point. That was a little bit more expensive.
So what is the wine crate version? Is that Dirty Deluxe that we've been talking about?
It's more like it's the expansion in a bigger box that's designed to hold all viticulture stuff. Nothing else is in there except for the expansion. But that was one thing where people were asked us for a bigger box. I was like, all right, I'll make a bigger box.
So it isn't like the blingy thing. It's just like a more functional.
It's just an organizer box.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Okay. And that's the big thing coming from Stegmaier. And you have other things that are like that 5-year game that I've mentioned a couple of times percolating back there. And so
probably still another year away. Yeah. But for the rest of the year, we have the Wingspan expansion, the next one, which we haven't quite announced yet, but that'll be the next thing. That we have.
Third expansion. Wow.
Third expansion. Yeah.
All right. Jamey Stegmaier, thank you very much for helping me out with this conversation.
Thanks for talking, Jason.
If you can change your mind, you can change the world, people. So until next time, lay everybody.